The bully shoved a single dad in front of the CEO expecting fear, anger, or humiliation, but seconds later, the whole cafe went silent. Outside rain hammered the streets of Savannah. Inside Blue Heron Café, 8-year-old Maisie watched her father hit the edge of a table as her blue crayon rolled through spilled coffee. Jack Turner could have fought back. He had the strength. He had the training. And after everything life had already taken from him, no one would have blamed him. But what he did next forced a powerful CEO to question the man she trusted, the company she built, and the kind of woman she had become. Stay with this story because it is not only about revenge. It is about dignity, fatherhood, second chances, and the courage to protect what still matters. Like the video and tell us where you are watching from. 6 hours earlier, before the coffee hit the floor, and before every face in Blue Heron Café turned toward Jack Turner, the morning began with a smoke alarm chirping once every 43 seconds. Jack stood barefoot on a kitchen chair in the narrow hallway of his rented duplex, one hand braced against the ceiling and the other holding a fresh battery between his teeth. Pale morning light slipped through the blinds and stretched across the walls in thin gray bands. The house smelled like butter toast and the coffee he had forgotten to drink. From the kitchen, Maisie called out, "It did it again. I heard it. You said that last time." Jack pulled the battery free and looked down the hall. "You keeping records now? I am 8. I keep records of everything." She sat at the table wearing one sock, her school uniform shirt buttoned wrong at the bottom, and a blue crayon tucked behind one ear. Her dark hair was gathered into a crooked ponytail she had insisted on doing herself. In front of her sat a grilled cheese sandwich cut into 2 uneven triangles and a glass of milk she had not touched. Jack replaced the battery, waited, and listened. Silence. He stepped down from the chair. Maisie stared at the ceiling with suspicion. It is pretending. It is fixed. That is what pretending looks like. Jack smiled despite himself and carried the chair back into the kitchen. On the counter, beneath an unopened electric bill, lay a school form with a red line printed across the top. Field trip payment due Friday, $40. Jack picked it up. "Where did this come from?" Maisie kept coloring. "Your backpack," he said, "where I found it under 3 library books, a sock, and half a granola bar." The granola bar was still good. "Maisie." She pressed the blue crayon harder against the page. Jack sat across from her. "Why did you hide the form?" "I did not hide it. It was under a sock. That is not a hiding place. That is my backpack." He waited. Maisie's small shoulders rose, then fell. "It costs $40. That is not your problem. You make the worried face when you open the mail." Jack reached across the table and placed his palm over the form. "I am the dad. The worried face comes with the job." Maisie glanced up. "Like a uniform?" "Exactly." Jack signed the permission slip. "We will handle the payment." Maisie looked at the signature, then folded the form carefully and placed it inside the front pocket of her backpack. Above the kitchen shelf stood a photograph of Hannah at Tybee Island. Wind had blown her hair across her face, and she was laughing too hard to move it away. Maisie followed his eyes. "Do you think Mom would like my project?" Jack looked at the paper beneath her hand. At the top, in large classroom letters, someone had written, "Draw the person who makes a place feel safe." "I think your mom would have framed it before you finished." Maisie covered the drawing with both arms. "It is not done. I did not say I was looking." She narrowed her eyes. "You are bad at lying. So is your mother." Maisie looked at Hannah's photograph. For a moment the room softened. Then the smoke alarm chirped again. Jack closed his eyes. Maisie nodded toward the hallway, pretending. On the drive to school, Maisie kept her backpack between her feet and her sketchbook balanced on her knees. Jack stopped at the curb outside the school. Maisie opened the door, then paused. "Dad." "Yeah, do not forget the field trip. I will not. And do not tell June about the form." "Why, she will pay it." Jack looked toward the school entrance where children streamed through the doors. "You know her too well. So do you." Maisie leaned across the seat and kissed his cheek. "Pick me up if they close school early. I always do." She climbed out, shut the door, then opened it again. "And fix your worried face." Before Jack could answer, she ran toward the building. He watched until she disappeared inside. Blue Heron Café stood 12 minutes away near the edge of Savannah's riverfront district, squeezed between an old print shop and a narrow brick building that had once housed a tailor. Its faded blue sign hung above a striped awning. A painted heron stretched one wing across the front window, the color chipped around the edges by 32 years of sun and salt air. Jack parked behind the cafe and entered through the kitchen door. June Callahan stood at the register in a green apron, her silver hair pinned with 2 pencils because she had lost the clip she wore every day. She was arguing with the receipt printer. "You are early," she said without looking up. "You say that every time. You keep arriving early." Tessa Morales hurried past carrying 4 plates, balancing them along one arm with the concentration of someone crossing a narrow bridge. "Morning, Jack. Morning." "Table 6 wants to know if the biscuits are homemade." June raised her voice. "Tell them no. Tell them tiny factory workers make them in a basement." Tessa laughed and kept moving. Jack looked around the cafe. Every table near the window was occupied. Nothing about the room looked profitable enough for Preston Hale. Everything about it looked alive. Jack crossed behind the counter and crouched in front of the espresso machine. The old machine had been making a sharp electrical pop since dawn. June had turned it off before someone got hurt. "Did anyone open the panel?" he asked. June stopped fighting the printer. "No. Tessa. Not unless staring at it counts." Jack removed 2 screws and lifted the side cover. The smell of burned insulation rose immediately. He leaned closer. The black power line had not worn through. It had been cut with a narrow tool. The slice was clean, deliberate, and recent. Jack touched the insulation with the edge of a screwdriver, then withdrew his hand. "June." Something in his voice made her come closer. "What is it? This cable was cut." Her face tightened. "Cut by what wire cutters, most likely? Who would cut a coffee machine?" Jack looked toward the dining room. June lowered her voice. "Preston was here yesterday." Jack looked at her. "He said he needed photographs for his report. I told him to stay out of the kitchen, but the lunch rush started and I lost sight of him. Did he have access to the service key?" June glanced at the small brass hook beside the storage closet. The hook was empty. Her face went pale. Jack stood. "Do not accuse him yet. You think he did this? I think someone did." June folded her arms. "That is a Coast Guard answer. It is an answer that keeps us from making a mistake." He checked the shelf above the bakery case. A small security camera sat behind a row of ceramic birds. June's nephew had installed it after someone stole from the tip jar the previous winter. The camera had lost its connection to the cafe's wireless network months ago, and June assumed it no longer worked. Jack climbed onto a stool and removed the back panel. A tiny red light blinked. "It is still recording," he said. Jack ejected the memory card and slid it into a clear sleeve from his toolbox. "Do you have something that can play this? My old laptop might. Do not use it yet." June's frustration sharpened. "Why not?" "Because if there is evidence on this card, we preserve it before anyone knows we found it." He sealed the sleeve and slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket. June studied him. "You are expecting trouble." Jack looked back at the cut cable. "No, I am recognizing it." June returned to the register, but her hands were less steady now. 3 envelopes lay open beside the cash drawer. The first was a property tax notice. The second was an insurance renewal with a premium nearly twice the previous year's amount. The third carried the silver logo of Vaughn Hospitality Partners. Jack picked it up. They raised the offer. June gave a humorless laugh. They lowered the deadline. "They know about the bank," Jack said. "Preston knows everything. Loan balance, tax, deadline insurance." He recited the numbers yesterday like he was reading my obituary. June lowered her voice. "My payment is due Monday. If it does not clear, the bank can begin foreclosure. You own this building. The bank owns the part that matters." Jack set the offer down. "You are not signing today." June looked at him sharply. "I did not say I was. You did not have to." She stared at the envelope. "I am 64 years old, Jack. I have 7 employees, a leaking roof alone I should never have taken, and a coffee machine someone may have cut open with wire cutters. Pride does not pay property tax. This is not pride." "What is it then?" Jack looked around the cafe. "Leverage." June almost smiled. "That sounds expensive. Only if I am wrong. And if you are..." Jack rested one hand on the counter. "Then we deal with what is real, not what Preston wants you afraid of." June's expression softened. The construction had blocked parking for 4 months. Sidewalk access changed without notice. Delivery windows were restricted. Tour groups that once stopped at Blue Heron now crossed the street to avoid the barriers. Preston's reports called the decline proof that the cafe no longer fit the neighborhood. Jack called it pressure disguised as progress. At 10:45 on the other side of Savannah, Amelia Vaughn sat in the rear seat of a black SUV with a tablet resting across her knees. Her assistant Claire reviewed the riverfront projections from the seat opposite her. Blue Heron remains the only unsigned parcel, Claire said. The revised purchase offer expires Monday. Amelia scrolled through the photographs attached to Preston's latest report. A cracked tile, an empty pastry case, water damage near a ceiling vent, an exposed wire behind the espresso machine. She paused on the last image. When was this taken? Yesterday afternoon. Was the machine operational? The report says intermittent failure. Amelia looked out the window. She closed the report. Call Preston. Claire connected the phone. Preston answered on the first ring. Amelia, Blue Heron rejected the revised offer. June Callahan is emotional. She does not understand how close she is to losing the property. Then why has she survived 32 years? A pause. Survival is not success. Amelia glanced at Claire. What about Jack Turner? Preston exhaled as if the name itself were exhausting. Local handyman, widower, former Coast Guard. He has inserted himself into every discussion and encouraged June to reject reasonable offers. Has he threatened anyone? Not directly. That is not what your report says. He is controlled. Men like that are often worse when they finally break. Amelia looked again at the photograph of the exposed wire. Do not provoke him. I know how to conduct an inspection. I did not ask whether you knew. Preston's tone warmed immediately. Of course. Amelia ended the call. Claire watched her. You do not trust him. I trust documentation. That was not my question. Amelia set the tablet aside. No, I do not. The first rain reached the SUV windshield as they turned toward the riverfront. At Blue Heron, the lunch rush began early. Tessa moved between tables while June worked the register. Jack repaired the cut cable with a temporary shield enough to keep the machine safe until he could replace the full line. At 1:15, his phone vibrated. School closing early due to severe weather. He wiped his hands, grabbed his keys, and returned 20 minutes later with Maisie. June leaned over the counter. How was school short? Best kind. Maisie climbed into the corner booth. Jack placed a grilled cheese sandwich in front of her. I already ate. You carried your lunch here for a cat. He has fewer options. Jack sat across from her. You are eating half. Maisie looked toward June. Can I have pie? After Jack answered before June could? No. June placed a slice of peach pie beside the sandwich. Your father is under stress. Maisie nodded solemnly. He has the worried face. Jack pointed at both of them. This alliance is becoming a problem. The bell rang again. Preston Hale stepped inside. He wore a navy suit despite the humidity and carried no umbrella. A few drops of rain marked his shoulders, but his hair remained perfectly in place. He did not look at the menu. He looked at the room. The chipped floor, the crowded tables, the pastry case. Tessa. Why is the display half empty? Tessa glanced at June. We sold the morning batch, then make it look full. There are only 6 pastries left. Move them forward. Tessa hesitated. Preston stepped closer to the glass. People do not invest in empty. Jack looked up from the espresso machine. Preston noticed him. Still fixing things no one asked you to touch? June asked. June has made several poor decisions. June came from behind the register. This cafe has served this neighborhood for 32 years. Preston smiled at the faded walls. It looks every day of it. A customer near the window lowered his newspaper. Preston walked toward the counter, tapping one finger against the wood as though inspecting an object at auction. The redevelopment team arrives in less than an hour. I suggest everyone make an effort to appear functional. Tessa's cheeks reddened. Jack set his screwdriver on a folded towel. Functional is different from frightened. Preston turned. I do not remember asking for your opinion. You keep speaking loudly enough for the room. For a second, Preston's polished expression slipped. Then he smiled. Enjoy the performance while it lasts. He leaned close enough that only Jack could hear. When Amelia Vaughn walks through that door, you are going to stand there quietly while she signs this place away. The front windows flashed white. thunder rolled across the Savannah River and the cafe lights trembled above them. A second later, the bell above the entrance rang. The wind caught the door before the woman entering could control it. Jack moved around Preston, crossed the room, and caught the brass handle before the glass struck the wall. Rain swept across the threshold. Amelia Vaughn stood beneath the striped awning in a cream raincoat, one hand still extended toward the door. Her dark hair had been pinned neatly at the back of her head, though the wind had loosened a few strands near her face. Claire hurried in behind her with a tablet pressed beneath her coat. Marcus Bell entered last and pulled the door shut against the storm. For a moment, Amelia and Jack stood close enough to hear each other breathe. "Thank you," she said. Jack released the handle. "You may not feel that way by the end of the afternoon." Her eyes moved over his work shirt, the grease along his knuckles, and the old Coast Guard emblem attached to his keys. "You must be Jack Turner. That depends on which report you read." Claire looked up from her tablet. Preston appeared at Amelia's side with a smile that had not existed 10 seconds earlier. "Amelia, welcome to Blue Heron. I apologize for the condition. The staff has had difficulty preparing for a formal inspection." June stiffened behind the register. Amelia did not answer him immediately. Her attention had shifted to the espresso machine and the tools arranged with deliberate care beside it. "Is that equipment safe to operate?" she asked. "It is now," Jack said. "You repair restaurant equipment, I repair whatever people cannot afford to replace." Amelia removed one wet glove. "That does not sound like a profitable business." "It is not." "Then why do it?" Jack glanced toward June, who was quietly moving the acquisition envelope beneath the register, and then toward Maisie in the corner booth. She had stopped eating and was drawing Amelia with quick strokes of blue and gray, because some things cost more when you let them disappear. The answer settled between them. Amelia looked through the front window at the empty stores behind the construction fence. When she turned back, something in her expression had changed. Not enough to call it warmth, enough to call it attention. Preston noticed. He stepped between them and opened his folder. "Mr. Turner is not an employee. He is a local contractor who has repeatedly interfered with this acquisition." Jack picked up his screwdriver. "The machine needed a new power line. The whole property needs a new owner," Preston said. Amelia's gaze moved from one man to the other. Jack returned to the counter, but Preston followed and lowered his voice again. "By sunset, she will sign this place away." Jack tightened one screw, then looked at the polished man beside him. "Then why are you nervous?" Outside thunder rolled over the river again. This time Amelia heard the question. She stood near the entrance with rainwater darkening the shoulders of her coat, one glove still folded in her hand. Her gaze moved from Jack to Preston, not with suspicion yet, but with the quiet attention of someone who had just noticed a crack in a wall she had trusted for years. Preston smiled too quickly. Mr. Turner enjoys making ordinary business decisions sound sinister. Jack returned his attention to the espresso machine. "I did not call anything sinister." "No," Preston said. "You only implied it." Jack tightened the final screw and placed the screwdriver on the towel. "If the implication bothers you, maybe it belongs there." The cafe fell quiet around them, though not completely. Cups still touched saucers. Rain still hissed against the glass. Somewhere in the kitchen a timer rang and Tessa hurried to silence it. Amelia watched Jack wash the grease from his hands in the small sink behind the counter. He did not look like a man trying to impress her. That unsettled her more than open hostility would have. Most people changed when she entered a room. Their voices became warmer, their posture sharpened. They laughed too easily. They agreed before she finished speaking. Jack Turner did none of those things. He dried his hands on a white towel and looked at June. "Ready." June glanced at the acquisition documents beneath the register. "As I will ever be." Amelia removed her coat and handed it to Claire. "Then let us begin." Preston opened his folder and stepped beside her. "The dining room has several visible deficiencies. Flooring damage, outdated seating, inefficient lighting, and a layout that limits service capacity." Amelia looked down. The floorboards were worn but clean. Near the center aisle, one board rose slightly above the others. A strip of yellow tape had been placed beside it so customers would not trip. "Has anyone been injured?" she asked. June answered. "No repair estimate." Jack spoke from behind the counter. $380 if the damaged section is lifted and reset. Less if June finds matching wood at salvage. Preston gave him an irritated look. Amelia turned toward Jack. You prepared an estimate, I prepare one every time something breaks. Do you document the repairs? Jack pointed toward a shelf beneath the register. June pulled out a thick binder. Every page was dated. Each repair included photographs, material costs, and notes about whether the work was temporary or permanent. Amelia opened the binder. The handwriting changed from page to page. Some entries were Jack's. Others belonged to June or contractors who had worked on the building during the past decade. Preston cleared his throat. Maintenance records do not change the fact that the property is deteriorating. No, Amelia said. But they change whether the deterioration was ignored. She passed the binder to Claire. Scan the last 3 years. Preston's expression tightened. June noticed. So did Jack. Amelia moved toward the kitchen. The room behind the counter was narrow and hotter than the dining area. Steel shelves lined one wall. Pans hung above a prep table polished by decades of hands. A patch of ceiling near the rear vent showed faint water damage. Preston pointed to it immediately. Active leak. Jack looked up. Old stain. The report identifies it as active. The roof was repaired in March. Preston flipped through his folder. There is no professional invoice. I repaired it. That proves my point. Jack folded his arms. What point is that? That this business survives through improvised labor instead of proper investment. Jack looked toward Amelia. The repair passed inspection. Amelia asked, by whom? Savannah Building Safety. April 9th. Claire searched the city database on her tablet. A few seconds later, she looked up. He is correct. Inspection passed. No active leak was noted. The kitchen became very still. Preston laughed softly. City inspections are hardly comprehensive. Amelia did not respond. She continued through the kitchen, opening storage cabinets and checking labels. June answered every question without hesitation. How much food was wasted each week? Less than 4%. How often did equipment fail? 3 service interruptions in 6 months. How many workers had been employed at Blue Heron for more than 5 years? 5 of the 7 current employees. What was the average weekday customer count before the riverfront construction began? 112. And after 76. Amelia looked up from Claire's notes. That is a significant drop. Preston nodded. Evidence that the concept has lost relevance. Jack stood in the doorway. The construction fence removed half the parking. Preston did not turn. Temporary disruption. It lasted 4 months. Still temporary. The delivery entrance was blocked for 6 weeks, Jack said. Tour buses stopped using this side of the street. The city moved the pedestrian crossing 2 blocks east. 3 nearby offices shifted to remote schedules because of the noise. Amelia faced Preston. Were those conditions included in the revenue analysis? They were not material. Jack leaned against the doorframe. They were material to the people who stopped walking through that door. Preston's voice sharpened. You are not an economist. No. Then perhaps you should leave financial analysis to professionals. Jack's eyes remained calm. I know the difference between a business failing and a business being isolated. Amelia looked through the rain-streaked kitchen window toward the construction barriers outside. Orange fencing ran along the block. A section of sidewalk ended in mud. 2 parking meters were covered with black plastic. Claire, she said, requests traffic data for the past 12 months. Preston shifted. That is unnecessary. Amelia turned toward him. Why? Because the acquisition is based on long-term potential, not short-term inconvenience. Then traffic data should support your position. Preston closed his folder. Of course. The words sounded obedient. His face did not. They returned to the dining room. Maisie watched from the corner booth with her sketchbook open. Jack passed her table and placed a hand on the top of her head. You eating? She pointed to the empty plate. The pie disappeared too. Tragic. June said, stress burns sugar. June called from the register. I said, no such thing. Maisie grinned. Amelia paused beside the booth. What are you drawing? Maisie covered the page. Jack said, you do not have to show anyone. I know. Amelia studied the child. There was no fear in Maisie's face, only caution. The kind children learned when adults around them carried too many worries. Amelia glanced at Jack. Your daughter, yes. How old? 8. Maisie corrected him. 8 and 3 months. Amelia almost smiled. My mistake. Maisie looked at her cream coat now folded across Claire's arm. You came to buy the café. The question was so direct that Claire lowered her tablet. Amelia answered carefully. I came to decide whether my company should. Would you change the name? That would depend on the plan. Would June still work here? Amelia hesitated. Preston stepped in. The new hotel would create hundreds of jobs. Maisie looked at him. I did not ask you. Tessa turned away quickly to hide a smile. Jack pressed his lips together. Amelia sat in the chair opposite Maisie. No decision has been made. Maisie watched her for a moment, then slowly turned the sketchbook around. The drawing showed Blue Heron Café in bright blue and gold. June stood behind the counter. Tessa carried a tray. Jack was near the door with one hand on the handle. Amelia stood outside in the rain. A closed umbrella rested in her hand. Amelia looked at the page longer than she expected to. Why am I outside? Maisie studied the picture. You look like you do not know if you are allowed to come in. The room seemed to narrow around Amelia. Jack said gently, Maisie. Amelia raised one hand. It is all right. She looked back at the drawing. Why is the umbrella closed? Maisie tilted her head. Maybe you forgot it works. Jack's expression changed. Not because the words were rude. They were not. Because he understood what Maisie had seen. Amelia possessed enough power to walk through any door in the city. Yet the child had drawn her standing in the rain, holding protection she refused to open. Amelia touched one corner of the page. You notice a great deal. Maisie pulled the sketchbook closer. Dad says noticing is how you keep people safe. Jack looked toward the windows. He was not embarrassed, but he did not know what to do with Amelia's eyes on him. Preston stepped closer. Children turn everything into a story. Maisie's fingers tightened around the blue crayon. Preston continued. Her father encourages it. It helps him keep himself at the center of every room. Jack's gaze lifted. Leave her out of this. I am not criticizing her. You are using her. Preston smiled. That is rich coming from you. Amelia stood. What does that mean? Preston looked at her, sensing an opportunity. Mr. Turner has built a reputation around personal tragedy. Free repairs, quiet gestures, a grieving child in the corner. It creates loyalty. June's face hardened. Watch yourself. Preston ignored her. He interferes with every offer because he needs this cafe to need him. Jack took one step forward. The movement was small. The room felt it. My wife's name was Hannah. Preston's smile remained. No one questioned that. You mentioned her death. I mentioned your behavior. You do not get to use her death because you are losing an argument. The rain grew heavier. Water ran down the windows in silver lines. The street beyond them blurred until the buildings looked like shapes beneath glass. Amelia watched Jack's face. His anger was visible now, but it did not control him. His shoulders remained low. His hands stayed open. Preston noticed the restraint and mistook it for weakness. Everyone loses someone, Turner. June inhaled sharply. Tessa stopped beside the counter. Jack said nothing for several seconds. Then he looked toward Maisie. She had lowered her eyes to the sketchbook. When Jack spoke, his voice was quieter. Not everyone has to watch a child learn how to live without her mother. Amelia felt the words more than she expected. Preston crossed his arms. And yet you have turned grief into a permanent excuse to interfere with a private transaction. June stepped from behind the register. This is my transaction. Preston pointed toward the envelope beneath the counter. And you are days from losing the right to make it. June stopped. He had aimed the truth like a weapon. Amelia's expression cooled. Mr. Hale. Preston turned toward her. That is enough. For a moment, surprise flashed across his face. Then he softened his tone. Amelia, I understand how this looks, but the company hired me to secure this block. Sentiment has delayed the project for months. Sentiment did not ask you to insult a widow in front of her daughter, widower Jack said. Amelia looked at him. Jack nodded toward himself. Hannah was my wife. Amelia's eyes softened. Of course. The apology was simple. It landed because she did not protect herself with explanation. Preston saw the exchange. Something restless moved behind his eyes. He walked toward the pastry case. Tessa, she turned. Yes. Why is this still half empty? We sold the morning batch. I told you to arrange it properly. I did. Then why does it look careless? Tessa glanced at Amelia. The attention made her nervous. She lifted a tray of clean coffee cups from beneath the counter. As she turned, the edge of one saucer caught the warped wooden brace. The saucer slid. It tapped the counter, rolled once, and fell to the floor. It did not break. Tessa froze. Preston snapped his fingers toward the saucer. Unbelievable. She bent immediately. I am sorry. Do not apologize to the floor. Tessa stopped halfway down. Preston nodded toward Amelia. Apologize to Miss Vaughn. She is here to decide whether this place deserves saving, and you are showing her exactly why it does not. Amelia's face tightened. Tessa stood with the saucer in her hand. Miss Vaughn, I am sorry. Her voice shook. The customers looked away. Not because they agreed with Preston, because many of them knew the fear of losing a paycheck and understood how expensive courage could become. June opened her mouth. Preston raised one finger toward her. Do not. June's lips closed. Jack stepped away from Maisie's booth. He moved beside Tessa. Not in front of her, beside her. She did not drop it, he said. Preston turned slowly. What? The counter brace is loose. Jack tapped the warped wood with 2 fingers. You cracked it yesterday when you leaned against it. Preston laughed. That is absurd. I told you then. You are accusing me of damaging the furniture. Now I am stating what happened. Jack took the saucer from Tessa, wiped it with a clean cloth, and set it near the sink. Preston moved closer. Careful, Turner. Jack looked at him. Truth does not become disrespect because it comes from someone you do not respect. The cafe went quiet. Amelia watched Tessa. The young woman stood with both hands clasped against her apron. Her cheeks were red. Her eyes remained fixed on the counter. Amelia understood that she should have spoken sooner. The realization did not flatter her. It exposed her. She turned to Tessa. You do not owe me an apology. Tessa looked up. Amelia continued. A saucer rolled because the counter is damaged. That is not a moral failure. Tessa swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Preston gave a short laugh. Wonderful. We are turning basic standards into a discussion about dignity. Jack looked at him. You started the discussion. No, you did. The moment you decided every correction was an attack. Jack's voice remained even. You did not correct her. You humiliated her, and you cannot resist playing protector. I asked you to let her work. You think that makes you noble? No. Jack glanced at Tessa. It makes her able to finish her shift. Preston looked around. Phones had begun to rise near the windows. A businessman seated alone turned his camera slightly toward the counter. An older man folded his newspaper and placed it beside his coffee. Preston saw the room changing. He saw Amelia watching Jack. He saw Maisie clutching her sketchbook. He saw Tessa standing straighter because someone had chosen to stand beside her. Pride tightened his face. You people always do this. June frowned. What people? People who confuse failure with virtue. You expect the world to preserve every tired business, every poor decision, every sad memory. Jack took one slow breath. This cafe is not failing because the neighborhood stopped caring. It is failing because it belongs to the past. Then why did your company block the street before making an offer? Preston's eyes narrowed. Construction was approved by the city, and your report ignored its effect. The report reflected performance. It reflected the picture you wanted Amelia to see. Preston stepped closer. You think this is your moment? Jack did not move. No, then stop performing. I am not performing. You are standing in front of your daughter trying to look like a good man. Jack's expression hardened. Do not bring her into this. Preston looked past him toward Maisie. Then do not raise her in a place that teaches her failure is something to protect. Maisie flinched. Jack saw it. The restraint in his face did not disappear. It changed. It became deliberate. He positioned himself between Preston and the booth. This is finished. Preston smiled. You do not decide that. Leave the staff alone. Leave my daughter alone. Finish the inspection and go. You do not give orders in this room. Jack held his gaze. Neither do you. The words were quiet. That made them worse. Preston looked toward Amelia. She did not defend him. Claire stood motionless with the tablet in her hands. Marcus had shifted away from the door. Every eye in the cafe rested on Preston now. He needed the room back. He needed Jack angry. He needed the reports to become true. Men like you always hide behind a hard luck story, Preston said. Jack did not answer. You think losing your wife gives you permission to interfere with everyone else's business? Jack's hands curled once, then opened. Maisie saw the movement. So did Amelia. Jack spoke through a tight jaw. Walk away. Preston leaned closer. Or what, walk away? Preston shoved him. Jack's body struck the edge of the nearest table. A chair scraped across the floor. A coffee mug tipped and spilled over the wood. Maisie gasped. Her blue crayon slipped from her fingers and rolled through the dark coffee gathering on the floor. For a second, no one moved. Preston stood over Jack with one hand still raised. Stay down, Turner. Jack's shoulder burned where it had hit the table, but he turned toward Maisie first. Look at me, Bug. Tears filled her eyes. Jack raised one open hand. Are you hurt? She shook her head. He reached down, picked up the blue crayon, and wiped it against the dry side of his shirt. Then he placed it back in her hand. Preston laughed. You think this makes you look strong? Jack rose slowly. The cafe held its breath. No. His eyes moved to Maisie. It means my daughter does not have to remember me becoming you. The old refrigerator hummed behind the counter. Rain tapped against the windows. No one spoke. Preston's face flushed. He reached for Jack's collar. Jack caught his wrist, turned half a step, and guided the arm downward. There was no punch, no struggle, no sound except Preston's sudden breath. Jack held him only long enough to stop the movement. Do not touch me again. He released him immediately and stepped back. His hands remained open. Marcus looked at the faded Coast Guard emblem hanging from Jack's keys. Amelia looked from Preston to Jack, then toward the frightened employees and the silent customers. Preston rubbed his wrist. You are taking his side. Amelia stepped between them. Her voice was calm. No. She looked around the cafe. I am finally looking at the room. Amelia's words did not rise above the rain, but they reached every table. Preston stood in front of her with his face flushed and one hand wrapped around the wrist Jack had released. No bruise had formed. No joint had been twisted. Jack had used only enough pressure to stop him, yet Preston looked more humiliated than if he had been struck. Jack barely looked at him. He turned toward Tessa first. Did the coffee reach you? Tessa glanced down at her shoes. No. Any glass break? She shook her head. Jack looked toward June. You all right? June still had one hand pressed against the register. Her face was pale, but she nodded. It missed me. Only then did Jack kneel in front of Maisie. She stood beside the booth with the blue crayon locked inside her fist. Her breathing came in short, uneven pulls. She stared at the coffee spreading across the floor as though the dark stain might swallow the whole room. Jack placed both hands on his knees. Bug, look at me. Maisie lifted her eyes. I am okay. Her chin trembled. He pushed you. I know. You hit the table. I did. Does it hurt? Jack could feel pain burning through his shoulder and down his back. He kept his expression steady. A little. Maisie looked toward Preston. Jack shifted just enough to block her view. Stay with me. He placed one open palm against the center of his chest. In through your nose. Maisie tried, but the breath caught. Jack did it again. Slow. Just like when thunder gets loud. She drew in a breath. That's it. Jack waited. Now let it out. The air left her in a shaky stream. He repeated the rhythm until her shoulders lowered. The cafe watched a father rebuild safety one breath at a time. Amelia stood a few feet away, motionless. Jack had been struck in front of a room full of strangers. His daughter had watched. Cameras had been raised. The man responsible was still standing within reach. Yet Jack had checked every other person before touching his own shoulder. He had not asked whether Amelia believed him. He had not demanded punishment. He had not tried to turn the room into a jury. He had simply begun repairing what Preston had damaged. Marcus stepped away from the entrance and approached the spilled coffee. He lifted the fallen chair and set it upright. As he bent, his attention settled on the keys hanging from Jack's belt. A faded Coast Guard rescue swimmer emblem was attached to the ring. The rubber had worn smooth along one edge. Marcus looked at Jack. You served Jack kept his eyes on Maisie. 11 years. Aviation survival technician Jack nodded. Marcus glanced at Preston's wrist. That explains the hold. Preston let out a sharp laugh. He attacked me. Marcus straightened. No. The single word carried the weight of professional certainty. Preston stared at him. Marcus continued. You reached for him. He redirected your arm, stopped your forward movement, and released you as soon as the threat ended. You work for us. I work security. Preston stepped closer. Then secure the situation. Marcus looked around the cafe. The situation is secure. The answer left Preston with nowhere to place his anger. Jack rose slowly from his crouch. Maisie kept hold of 2 of his fingers. Marcus noticed the way Jack favored his left shoulder. You should have that checked. I will. You trained at Elizabeth City Second Tour. Marcus gave a small nod. I was military police at Fort Stewart. Jack looked at him for the first time. That why you saw the movement? That and I know what restraint looks like. Preston scoffed. Marcus did not take his eyes off Jack. Being able to hurt someone and choosing not to are different skills. Jack looked toward Maisie. They should be the same skill. The older man near the window slowly placed his newspaper on the table. A woman seated beside the pastry case lowered her phone. The room was no longer silent because people were frightened. They were listening. Amelia turned toward Preston. Your report described Mr. Turner as unstable. He is. He was pushed into a table. He provoked me. He told you to leave his daughter alone. Preston spread his hands. You heard only the end of the conversation. I heard enough. No, you saw a performance. Jack's expression tightened, but he remained beside Maisie. Preston looked at the customers. He has been performing for this neighborhood for years, fixing things for free, refusing payment, making sure everyone knows he is the noble widower. June came around the counter. He never asked anyone to know. That is the trick, June. He does it quietly, so all of you tell the story for him. Tessa stepped forward. You humiliated me over a saucer. Preston turned. I corrected an employee. You told me I was the reason this place did not deserve to survive. You made a mistake in front of the company's chief executive. The counter is broken. Preston looked toward Amelia. Do you see what he has done? Every person in this room now believes ordinary standards are cruelty. Jack's voice came from behind him. No, they believe cruelty is cruelty. Preston turned sharply. Jack had not moved closer yet. The space between them seemed smaller. Preston pointed at him. You need them to believe you are some kind of protector. Jack's eyes held his. I need my daughter to know I did not stay quiet when someone was being mistreated. You were not protecting anyone. You were inserting yourself. Tessa's voice shook, but she spoke. He stood beside me when everyone else was afraid. The admission moved through the cafe. June looked down. Several customers did the same. Amelia felt the quiet shame in the room. It was not shame over what Jack had done. It belonged to the people who had watched Preston humiliate Tessa and had decided that silence was safer. She recognized the feeling because she shared it. She had entered Blue Heron with the power to stop Preston immediately. Instead, she had observed. She had measured. She had waited for certainty while someone with less power absorbed the cost of her hesitation. Preston saw Amelia's expression and pressed harder. You are letting sentiment distort a business decision. Amelia looked at him. I have not made a business decision. You came here to approve the acquisition. I came here to verify the information you provided. And you have no. The word was quiet. Preston blinked. Amelia continued. I have seen information you omitted. I have seen maintenance records you dismissed. I have seen an employee apologize for damage she did not cause. I have seen you provoke a man whose behavior contradicts every warning in your report. Preston's mouth tightened. You are trusting strangers over your own director. I am asking why the strangers are easier to verify. The rain struck the awning in heavy waves. Maisie shifted beside Jack. He looked down. You want to sit? She shook her head. Her sketchbook remained pressed against her chest. Preston noticed it. Here we go, he said. The child with the drawings. Jack's voice turned cold. Stop! But Maisie stepped out from behind him. Jack reached gently for her shoulder. You do not have to do anything. I know. She looked up at him. That is why I want to. Jack's hand fell away. Maisie crossed the space between the booth and Amelia. Her sneakers squeaked against the wet floor near the spilled coffee. She held the sketchbook with both hands. Amelia lowered herself until they were nearly eye level. What would you like me to see? Maisie looked toward Jack once, then opened the book. The first drawing showed a gray car beside a curb. Rain fell in thick blue lines. An elderly woman stood under a red umbrella while Jack crouched near the front tire. That is Mrs. Wilkes, Maisie said. The older woman near the window raised one hand. That is me. Every face turned toward her. Mrs. Wilkes folded her hands around her coffee cup. My tire went flat after church. I had $26 in my purse and needed it for a prescription. Maisie pointed to the drawing. Dad changed the tire. Mrs. Wilkes smiled through tears. He would not take the money. Jack looked toward the window. You brought us peach preserves the next week. That was not payment. It was good preserves. A few people laughed softly. The sound released some of the pressure in the room. Maisie turned the page. The second drawing showed Tessa beside a small car with its hood raised. Jack held jumper cables. A dark building stood behind them with a bright red sign above the entrance. That is the hospital, Maisie said. Tessa's brother was sick. Tessa covered her mouth. Maisie continued. Her car would not start and Dad fixed the battery. Tessa looked at Amelia. My brother had a fever after surgery. Jack came outside after working all day. He stayed until the car started, then followed me to the hospital because he thought it might stop again. Jack glanced at her. You never told me it did. It did not. Then following you worked. Tessa laughed once through her tears. Maisie turned another page. A teenage boy sat behind the cafe with a bowl of soup. His hood covered most of his face. Jack stood near the kitchen door, looking away. That is Eli. June closed her eyes. Maisie traced the edge of the drawing. He used to wait by the bus stop after school. Dad knew he was hungry, but Eli did not want anybody to know. Jack's gaze shifted toward the rear door. Maisie continued. Dad asked June to make too much soup by accident. June wiped her cheek with the back of one hand. For 4 months, she said, every weekday. A customer near the counter whispered, I remember him. Maisie nodded. He moved to Jacksonville with his aunt. Preston folded his arms. What does any of this prove? Maisie looked at him. No one answered for her. She turned another page. The drawing showed Jack kneeling outside Blue Heron with a toolbox. One hand held the loose-bottom step while June stood in the doorway. That step moved when it rained, Maisie said. Dad fixed it before Mrs. Wilkes came in. Another page showed Jack carrying bags of groceries into an apartment building. Another showed him replacing a broken porch light for a woman holding a baby. Another showed him sitting on the sidewalk beside a frightened dog while traffic moved around them. None of the pictures placed Jack in the center. In some, his face was barely visible. He was beneath a sink, behind a raised hood beside a doorway, or kneeling in the rain. The drawings did not make him look larger than everyone else. They made him present. Amelia looked at Jack. He appeared uncomfortable now, not because the stories were false, but because they had never belonged to him in this form. He had done those things privately. Maisie had turned them into a record. Preston shook his head. Children turn ordinary events into fairy tales. Maisie held the sketchbook closer. Dad says being kind is ordinary. Jack closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Amelia saw grief move behind his composure. Maisie turned to the final drawing. This page was different. The colors were darker. Jack sat alone at a corner table inside Blue Heron. Bills were stacked beside him. His head rested in one hand. A photograph of Hannah stood near a cold cup of coffee. June was drawn behind the counter carrying a plate. Beneath the table sat a much smaller Maisie with her knees pulled to her chest. Maisie's voice grew quieter. This was after Mom died. Jack stared at the picture. He had never seen this page. Maisie pointed toward the small figure under the table. I did not talk very much. June pressed her lips together. Maisie looked at Amelia. Dad brought me here every morning before school. He sat in the same booth. June brought him food because sometimes he forgot. Jack looked toward June. She shook her head gently, asking him not to interrupt. Maisie continued. Dad thought I was drawing under the table. What were you doing? Amelia asked. Listening. The answer caught Jack off guard. Maisie looked toward him. You told June you did not know how to be both parents. Jack's throat tightened. He remembered that morning. Rain had been falling then, too. Maisie had been 6 and silent beneath the table. Jack had believed she could not hear him over the espresso machine. Maisie looked back at Amelia. June said he did not have to be both. He only had to be Dad. June turned away and wiped both eyes. Maisie's finger moved across the picture. This cafe did not need Dad because he was sad. She paused. Dad needed this place until he was not sad every minute. The words left no room for movement. Jack lowered his head. For 3 years he had tried to protect Maisie from the worst parts of his grief. He had believed she remembered only fragments, quiet breakfasts, drives to school, the nights he fell asleep in his clothes because the bed felt too large. But children remembered the shape of pain even when adults hid its name. Jack crossed the room and knelt beside her. I am sorry you heard that. Maisie shook her head. I am not. You should not have had to worry about me. I did not worry all the time. That is too much for a kid. She touched his cheek. You worried about me too. Jack's eyes filled. He covered her hand with his. Amelia looked away for a moment, giving him what privacy the room could offer. When she looked back, Jack had regained control, but not the distance he had worn before. His grief was visible now. So was his love. Amelia crouched beside Maisie. I judged your father before I knew him. Maisie studied her. Because of Preston. Because I trusted what was written about him. Do you still? Amelia looked toward Preston. No. Maisie closed the sketchbook. Are you going to fix it? The question was not angry. That made it harder. Amelia had spent years answering board members, investors, attorneys, and journalists. She knew how to speak without committing more than necessary. She knew how to turn uncertainty into language that sounded controlled. None of those skills helped her now. I am going to try. Maisie considered the answer. Then she nodded once. Jack watched Amelia. For the first time since she entered the cafe, she did not look like a chief executive making a calculation. She looked like a woman standing in front of a child who had asked for honesty and refused to accept anything less. Preston stepped forward. This has gone far enough. Amelia rose. No one asked you to speak. This is emotional theater. June turned toward him. That child just told you what this place meant after her mother died, and it changes nothing about debt property value or operating margins. Jack stood beside Maisie. No, it does not. Preston seemed surprised by the agreement. Jack continued. Kindness does not erase debt. Grief does not repair wiring. A good memory does not keep a building open. June looked at him. Amelia waited. Jack's eyes shifted toward the espresso machine, but evidence matters. Preston's face changed slightly. Jack saw it. So did Amelia. Jack guided Maisie back toward the booth. Sit with June for a minute. Maisie obeyed, though her eyes remained on him. Jack walked behind the counter and removed the side panel from the espresso machine. The screws rested in a neat row on the folded towel. He pointed toward the black power cable. Claire, can you come closer? Amelia's assistant approached with her tablet. Jack held a small flashlight toward the cable. What do you see? Claire leaned forward. A cut. Not where? She shook her head. The edges are too clean. Jack looked toward June. When did the machine begin failing? This morning, a little after 6. Jack turned toward Amelia. I opened the panel at 6:30. The cable had been sliced. Someone also loosened the counter brace that caught Tessa's saucer. Preston laughed. You are a handyman pretending to conduct an investigation. Jack did not look at him. The cafe has a camera above the bakery shelf. June pointed toward the small device. It stopped connecting to the network months ago. It stopped connecting, Jack said. It did not stop recording. Preston's face lost a shade of color. Only one. It was enough. Amelia saw it. Jack reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed the clear protective sleeve. The memory card rested inside. I removed this before the inspection began. The original has not been played or altered. Marcus stepped closer. You documented the time Jack nodded, photographed the card in place, recorded the serial number, then sealed it. Preston shook his head. This is absurd. Marcus held out his hand. I can maintain custody while it is reviewed. Jack passed him the sleeve. Marcus examined the seal, then handed it to Claire. Use a clean device. Copy the file before playback. Claire opened her equipment case and removed a small card reader. Preston moved toward Amelia. You are allowing a local contractor to hijack a corporate inspection based on a damaged appliance. Amelia did not look at him. If the footage shows nothing, you have lost 10 minutes. And if it has been manipulated, then legal will determine that. You cannot seriously believe him. Amelia turned. I believe your reaction deserves examination. Preston's jaw tightened. Claire inserted the memory card into the reader. A series of files appeared on her tablet. She selected the recording from that morning and created a copy. The cafe's wall screen hung above the counter. It normally displayed the daily menu community announcements and photographs from local school events. Claire connected her tablet. The screen went black. A spinning symbol appeared. No one spoke. Jack stood near Maisie's booth with his injured shoulder lowered slightly. Amelia remained beside the counter. Marcus positioned himself between Preston and the rear exit without touching him. The screen flickered. A grainy view of the empty cafe appeared. Tables sat in darkness. The bakery case reflected a thin line of streetlight. The timestamp in the corner read 5:47 in the morning. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the rear service door opened. Preston Hale stepped into the cafe carrying a small black tool case. The image on the wall screen was grainy, but there was no mistaking the sharp line of his shoulders or the deliberate way he closed the service door behind him. He stood in the darkness for several seconds. Then he reached into his coat and removed a key. June leaned toward the screen. I never gave him that. No one answered. On the recording, Preston crossed behind the counter. He did not hesitate or search for the espresso machine keyhole. He knew exactly where it was. He unlocked the panel. The timestamp moved from 5:48 to 5:49. Preston opened the tool case and removed a pair of wire cutters. Tessa covered her mouth. Jack remained beside Maisie's booth, one hand resting lightly against the back of her chair. He had already seen the cut cable. He had expected the footage to show someone entering the cafe. He had not known whether the camera would capture the act clearly. Now the room watched Preston place the cutters around the black power line. The blades closed. A small spark flashed on the screen. Maisie looked up at Jack. He met her eyes and gave the smallest nod, letting her know she was safe. On the recording, Preston withdrew the cutters and used his phone to photograph the sliced cable from several angles. Claire enlarged the image. The photograph on Preston's phone matched the picture Amelia had reviewed in the SUV, the same exposed wire, the same open panel, the same evidence presented as proof of neglect. Amelia stared at the screen. Her face did not change, but the hand holding her glove slowly closed. Preston looked around the real cafe. This proves nothing about why I was here. No one turned toward him. On the screen, his earlier self closed the espresso machine panel and moved toward the counter. He placed both hands on the wooden edge and pushed downward. The brace beneath it shifted. He crouched, opened his tool case again, and loosened 2 screws. Tessa looked at the saucer resting near the sink. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He made it happen. Jack looked toward her. Tessa's eyes filled. He knew the counter would move. June reached for her hand. The footage continued. Preston stood and tested the counter with his palm. It tilted slightly under the pressure. Satisfied, he walked toward the pastry case. He opened the rear panel, adjusted the temperature control, then left the door partly unsealed. June frowned. That explains the condensation. Jack nodded. And why the cream pastries spoiled before lunch. Preston moved toward Amelia. The equipment was old. I was documenting existing weaknesses. Amelia kept her eyes on the screen. You cut a live power cable. It was disconnected. You loosened a counterbrace to demonstrate instability. Tessa turned toward him. You set me up. Preston did not look at her. The recording showed him removing his phone. He dialed a number and waited. The cafe speakers carried the thin sound of his voice from 6 hours earlier. By 4 o'clock, Vaughn will see a failing business run by desperate people. The silence inside Blue Heron became absolute. Rainwater moved down the windows. A car passed outside its tires, sending a soft spray along the curb. On the recording, Preston paced behind the counter. No, June will not sign while Turner is in her ear. He listened, then he laughed. The widower is not a problem. I have already described him as unstable. If he reacts, he proves my report. Jack's fingers tightened once against the chair. Maisie looked at him. He released the pressure immediately. On the screen, Preston opened the register area and photographed the acquisition envelope. He has a rescue complex, the recorded voice continued. Men like that cannot resist confrontation. All I have to do is make him feel useful. Marcus looked at the real Preston. You planned the confrontation. Preston's eyes moved toward the rear door. Marcus shifted one step, closing the path without drawing attention to the movement. The voice on the recording continued. Once the bank pressure hits June, Callahan will take 40 cents on the dollar. Amelia's gaze sharpened. Preston stood completely still now. The person on the other end of the call said something the camera did not capture. Preston responded. My bonus is tied to the spread. The lower she sells, the better the quarter looks for everyone. Claire's head turned toward Amelia. Amelia did not look away from the screen. Preston laughed again in the recording. Do not worry about Vaughn. She wants the block. I give her numbers, she signs. She does not care how the room feels. The words filled the cafe. They used Amelia's name without respect, but that was not what struck her hardest. The cruelty in the sentence came from its confidence. Preston had believed she would not ask. He had believed the result would matter more to her than the method. He had believed that because her company had taught him to believe it. On the screen, Preston ended the call, placed the service key back in his pocket, and walked toward the rear door. The recording ended. The wall screen went black. No one moved. Preston lifted both hands. You are taking fragments out of context. Jack looked at him. The whole recording is context. Preston pointed toward the screen. You do not know who I was speaking to. Amelia finally turned. Who were you speaking to? Preston hesitated. A contractor. Name him. It was an informal conversation. Name him. Preston's jaw shifted. I do not remember. Claire looked down at her tablet. The outgoing call can be compared with company phone records. Preston glared at her. You work for me. Claire's voice remained level. I work for Vaughn Hospitality. Amelia stepped toward the counter. Search the acquisition agreement. Claire opened the file. What am I looking for his compensation terms? Preston moved closer. That is confidential. Amelia looked at Marcus. Marcus did not touch Preston. He simply stepped into the space between him and Claire. Claire searched the document. The room waited. After several seconds, she looked up. There is an acquisition performance provision. Amelia held out her hand. Claire passed her the tablet. Amelia read in silence. Preston spoke quickly. That provision was approved by finance. Amelia continued reading. The compensation schedule rewarded the regional acquisition director based on the difference between the independent property appraisal and the final purchase price. The greater the difference, the greater the bonus. Blue Heron had been appraised at nearly twice the amount Vaughn Hospitality intended to offer June. Amelia looked up. You earned more if she became desperate. Preston swallowed. I earned more if I negotiated effectively. You damaged her property. To create urgency, you falsified an inspection. I documented weaknesses. You planned to provoke a grieving father in front of his child. Preston's voice rose. I was protecting the project. No. Amelia took one more step toward him. You were protecting your bonus. Preston looked around the room. Faces that had avoided him earlier now held his gaze. The businessman near the window lowered his phone but kept it recording. Mrs. Wilkes sat straight in her chair. Tessa stood beside June, no longer shrinking into her apron. Preston turned back to Amelia. You wanted the properties. Yes. The answer stopped him. Amelia did not soften it. I wanted the block assembled before the board meeting. I approved the target. I approved the schedule. I approved the compensation structure. Claire looked at her. Amelia handed back the tablet. I rewarded speed. I rewarded lower purchase prices. I did not ask enough questions about how those results were achieved. Preston seized the opening. Exactly. I delivered what the company asked for. Amelia's eyes hardened. That is not a defense. You cannot punish me for succeeding under your rules. I can hold you responsible for assault, sabotage, coercion fraud, and falsified reporting. You benefited from every deal. Amelia absorbed the accusation. Jack watched her. This was the moment when powerful people often change the shape of the truth. They blamed a subordinate. They called misconduct isolated. They protected the company name and treated accountability like a public relations problem. Amelia looked toward June, then Tessa, then Maisie. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its corporate polish. He is right about one thing. Preston's face lifted. Amelia continued. My company created a system that made his behavior profitable. No one interrupted. I signed the incentive structure. I accepted reports without speaking to the people inside the buildings. I treated resistance as inefficiency because that made the numbers easier to approve. She turned toward Jack. You said the report gave me the answer I wanted. Jack held her gaze. Yes, you were right. The words landed harder than denial would have. Preston shook his head. This is insane. You are confessing failure to a room full of strangers. Amelia looked around Blue Heron. They were strangers because I chose not to know them. June's hand tightened around Tessa's. Amelia faced Preston again. You do not get to hide behind my failure. I will answer for mine. You will answer for yours. She looked at Claire. Call legal. Claire already had her phone in hand. Tell them to preserve the original footage and create verified copies. Suspend every acquisition under Preston's authority. No documents are to be altered or removed. Preston took one step forward. You cannot suspend an entire regional portfolio because of one video. Amelia continued as though he had not spoken. Contact the chair of the audit committee. Request an independent review of all property inspections, contractor reports, and compensation payments associated with his projects. Claire nodded. Anything else? Call Savannah police. The room shifted. Preston laughed once. It sounded brittle. For a cut wire for property damage, suspected fraud, coercion, and assault. You are making a spectacle. No, Amelia said. You did that when you pushed him. Marcus stepped closer to Preston. Remain where you are. Preston looked at him. You are taking orders from her in front of these people. Marcus's expression did not change. She is the chief executive. I am a senior director. You are also the subject of a police report. Preston reached for his phone. Marcus raised one hand. You may use it in my presence. Do not delete anything. Preston stared at him. You have no authority to seize my phone. I did not say I would seize it. I said I would observe. Preston slipped the device back into his pocket. Jack looked toward the wall screen. Claire saved the files somewhere outside the company network. She looked at him. Why? If he had access to the cafe before dawn, he may have access to reports or shared folders. Preserve one copy with legal, one with police, and one with June. Amelia nodded. Do it. Preston glared at Jack. You think you are an investigator now? Jack met his eyes. No, I think evidence should survive the people who want it gone. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. Maisie moved closer to Jack. Are they coming here? Yes. Are you in trouble? No. She looked toward Preston. Is he? Jack crouched carefully, protecting his injured shoulder. The police are going to ask questions. They will look at what happened and decide what comes next. Maisie frowned. You saw what happened. I did. Everybody did. That matters. But we still tell the truth carefully. She studied him, even when he did not. Especially then. Jack stood again. Amelia heard the exchange. She looked toward the acquisition envelope beneath the register. June. June faced her. The purchase process is suspended. June's expression did not change. Suspended is not canceled. No. Amelia did not offer comfort she had not yet earned. I cannot make a final commitment until legal reviews the property and the board is notified. But no one from Vaughn Hospitality will pressure you to sign anything today. June glanced toward Preston. And Monday, Amelia looked at Claire. Contact the bank. Inform them that our employee may have intentionally damaged the business during an active acquisition. Request a temporary hold on any foreclosure action while the matter is investigated. June's eyes filled. The bank does not have to agree, no, Amelia said, but they will understand that moving forward while evidence is under review creates risk for them. Jack watched her closely. This was not charity. It was leverage used in the opposite direction. The front door opened. 2 Savannah police officers entered, bringing the smell of wet pavement with them. Marcus met them near the entrance and explained the immediate situation. Claire prepared the footage. Tessa brought towels for the rain on their uniforms without being asked. One officer, a woman with gray at her temples, approached Jack. You are the person who was pushed, yes. Any injuries? Shoulder struck the table. Do you need medical attention? Not immediately. She looked toward Maisie. Your daughter witnessed it. Yes. Maisie gripped Jack's hand. The officer lowered her voice. We will not question her without you present. Jack nodded. Thank you. The second officer spoke with June and requested access to the rear door, the damaged machine, and the counterbrace. Jack showed him the cut cable but did not touch it again. Claire provided the copied footage. Marcus described the physical confrontation in precise terms. Preston interrupted twice. Both officers told him he would have an opportunity to provide his statement. Tessa stood near the register waiting for her turn. When the officer approached her, she looked toward Jack. He nodded once. Tessa told the truth. She described Preston's arrival, his comments, the loose counter, the saucer, Jack stepping beside her, and the shove. Her voice shook at first. By the end, it did not. Mrs. Wilkes gave a statement. So did the businessman near the window. He provided the video from his phone which showed Preston moving toward Jack before the shove and reaching for him a second time afterward. The elderly man with the newspaper had recorded audio. Another customer had photographed the spilled coffee and Maisie's crayon on the floor before anything was cleaned. The room that had once looked away now gave evidence. Preston watched each person step forward. His confidence thinned with every statement. When the officers asked him to accompany them outside for a formal interview, he turned toward Amelia. You are letting strangers destroy my career, Amelia answered quietly. You did not worry about their lives when you believed they could not reach yours. He looked at Jack. Jack did not smile. There was no satisfaction in his face, only exhaustion. Preston pointed toward him. This is what you wanted. Jack shook his head. I wanted you to leave people alone. Marcus held the door open. Preston walked into the rain between the officers. No one applauded. The cafe remained still until the door closed. Then sound returned slowly. The refrigerator hummed. A cup touched a saucer. Someone in the kitchen turned off the timer that had been ringing for nearly a minute. June sat down on the stool behind the register as though her knees had finally remembered they were tired. Tessa brought her a glass of water. Amelia remained near the center of the room. Without Preston there, the space around her felt different. She no longer appeared to own the future of the cafe. She looked like someone standing inside the consequences of her own decisions. She turned toward Tessa. I owe you an apology. Tessa stiffened. You do not have to. Yes, I do. Amelia approached the counter. You should not have been required to accept humiliation in order to protect your job. I saw what he was doing and I waited too long to stop it. Tessa looked down. I thought if I said anything, he would tell you I was difficult. He might have. Amelia did not pretend otherwise, and I might have believed him. Tessa looked up. Amelia continued. That is the part I have to change. Tessa nodded slowly. Amelia turned toward June. I accepted reports about your business without reviewing the construction impact, the inspection records, or the community traffic data. June held the water glass with both hands. You believed what was convenient. Yes. You were prepared to tear this place down. Yes. The honesty hurt more than a polished apology, but June respected it enough to keep listening. Amelia looked around the cafe. I cannot undo the pressure my company created. I can stop adding to it. June's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? The acquisition is canceled unless you decide someday that you want to sell. Claire looked up from her phone. Amelia continued. Vaughn Hospitality will pay for all repairs connected to Preston's actions. We will fund an independent electrical and structural inspection. We will also cover the revenue lost from the damaged equipment while the investigation proceeds. June stood, and after that, Amelia paused. June's voice sharpened. You repair what your employee broke, then leave me with the same loan and the same empty sidewalk. Jack watched Amelia. This was where generosity could become control if it moved too quickly. Amelia seemed to understand. What do you need? June gave a tired laugh. If I knew that I would not be 3 days from missing a payment. Jack stepped closer to the counter. She needs time without surrendering ownership. Amelia turned toward him. What would that look like, first restitution? That is not an investment and it is not a favor. Your company pays for the damage and lost business. Agreed. Second, the bank receives written notice that the acquisition was influenced by falsified reports and intentional damage. Claire is preparing it. Third, any financing offer must be separate from the property purchase. Amelia nodded. No ownership condition. None. June looked between them. Jack continued. Blue Heron needs revenue, not only debt. Amelia folded her arms. What do you propose? Jack pointed toward the kitchen. Your company operates 2 hotels within a mile. 3. Do they bake breakfast pastries on site? One does. The others use regional vendors. Blue Heron already produces more than the cafe can sell when foot traffic is normal. Give June the chance to bid on the hotel contracts. Amelia considered it. Volume would require equipment upgrades, then include the cost in a transparent loan or grant tied to the sabotage review. No hidden claim on the property. June looked at Jack. You have been thinking about this since the construction fence went up. Amelia's expression shifted. Not surprise now. Respect. What else? Jack looked through the front window. Restore the loading zone. Put the pedestrian crossing back where customers can use it. Require the redevelopment team to meet with the businesses on this block before changing access. The city controls the crossing. Your company requested the change. Amelia looked at Claire. Claire checked her records. He is right, Jack continued. Create a review group with local owners, not a company panel that invites them to speak after decisions are made. A group with the authority to stop changes that threaten access or safety. Amelia studied him. You are asking for oversight of a private development. I am asking you to stop treating the neighborhood like empty land. The words held no anger. That made them impossible to dismiss. Amelia looked toward June. Would you agree to serve on such a group? June glanced at the acquisition envelope, then at the people filling her cafe. Yes. Tessa blinked. Me? You work here every day. You see what policies do before executives read the reports. Tessa looked at June. June nodded. Yes, Tessa said, I would. Amelia turned back to Jack. And you know. The answer came immediately. Amelia raised an eyebrow. You designed half the proposal. I am not taking a seat from someone who owns a business on this block. You could advise it. That depends on the terms. A faint smile touched Amelia's mouth. You negotiate aggressively for a man who needs help. Jack looked toward Maisie. I know the difference between needing help and surrendering control. Amelia's smile disappeared, replaced by something quieter. So do I. Jack looked at her. For the first time, the tension between them was not built from opposition. It came from recognition. Amelia had spent years protecting control because she believed losing it meant losing herself. Jack protected control because too much of his life had already been decided by illness, grief bills, and other people's power. They stood on opposite sides of the counter and understood more than either wanted to admit. Claire approached Amelia. Legal is requesting a direct call. Amelia nodded, then looked at Jack. I want you involved in the review. He glanced toward the police car outside. You have lawyers. I need someone who understands safety and knows what reports fail to show. You do not know me. I know more than I did this morning. That is not the same as trust. No. Amelia held his gaze. But it is where trust starts. Jack looked toward June. She gave him no signal. This decision belonged to him. What exactly are you offering? A temporary independent consulting agreement, building safety ethical acquisition review, and community impact. Jack almost laughed. You created that position 30 seconds ago. Yes. That is not reassuring. It should not be. The honesty drew the corner of his mouth upward. Amelia noticed. So you do smile. Rarely during property disputes. I will have Claire draft terms. I will rewrite them. I assumed you would. Maisie appeared beside Jack with her sketchbook open. Neither adult had noticed her approach. She showed Amelia the earlier drawing. The cafe still glowed in blue and gold. Amelia still stood outside in the rain with the closed umbrella in her hand. Maisie placed the blue crayon against the page. She erased the line that kept the umbrella shut. Then she drew it open above Amelia's head. Amelia looked at the picture. Am I allowed inside now? Maisie considered the question. You are closer. Jack looked away to hide a smile. Outside, the rain began to weaken. A thin line of sunlight crossed the wet street and reached the front window of Blue Heron Café. It touched the spilled coffee first, then the blue crayon in Maisie's hand, then Amelia's face as she stood beneath the drawing of an open umbrella. For a moment, no one inside the cafe moved. The storm had not fully passed. Water still ran from the awning. Thunder lingered somewhere beyond the river. Police lights reflected against the buildings across the street, red and blue moving through the rain. But inside Blue Heron, the pressure that had filled the room all afternoon had begun to loosen. June looked at the damaged espresso machine. Tessa looked at the counter Preston had weakened. Jack looked at Amelia. The offer she had made was not enough to repair what her company had caused. Both of them understood that. It was only a beginning. Amelia handed Claire her glove, set the legal call for the back office. Claire nodded and walked toward the kitchen. Amelia turned to June. "I will return tomorrow morning with written confirmation that the acquisition has been canceled." June folded her arms. "Not suspended, canceled. And the repair agreement, you will receive that in writing, too." June studied her. No cameras. Amelia glanced toward the customers who still held their phones. No company cameras. No press release about saving a neighborhood cafe. Agreed. No photographs of Maisie. Amelia's eyes moved toward the child standing beside Jack. Not without her father's written permission. Jack shook his head. Not with it. Amelia looked at him. Jack's voice remained calm. "She is 8. She is not a marketing story." Amelia accepted the correction. Then no photographs of Maisie. June gave a small nod. It was not forgiveness. It was permission to continue speaking. Amelia looked toward the damaged counter. "The building inspection begins tomorrow. Your own contractor may be present." June glanced at Jack. "He will be." Jack's eyebrows lifted. "I have not agreed to anything." "You have been repairing this place for 7 years," June said. "You agreed a long time ago." Tessa smiled. Jack looked toward Maisie. "Apparently I work here now." Maisie tucked the blue crayon behind her ear. "You always worked here." The police officers finished collecting statements near the front door. One of them approached Jack with a small card containing a report number. "You should have your shoulder examined tonight." "I will." The officer looked at Maisie. "You did well." Maisie moved closer to her father. Jack answered for her. "She should not have needed to." The officer nodded. "No, she should not." When the officers left, the customers began gathering their coats and umbrellas. Several stopped to speak with June. Others placed cash beside the register even though no one had asked them to pay for the coffee that had gone cold. Mrs. Wilkes pressed a folded bill into Tessa's hand. For the repair fund. Tessa tried to return it. Mrs. Wilkes closed Tessa's fingers around the money. "Do not argue with an old woman who survived 2 husbands and 1 hip replacement." Tessa laughed through her tears. The businessman near the window gave Claire a copy of his recording before leaving. The elderly man carried his newspaper beneath his coat and stopped beside Jack. "You did right." Jack looked toward Maisie. "I hope so." The man followed his gaze. "She knows." Then he stepped into the rain. By the time the cafe emptied, evening had begun to settle over Savannah. The storm clouds broke apart above the river, leaving strips of pale gold between them. June locked the front door. Tessa turned the sign from open to closed. For the first time all day, Blue Heron belonged only to the people who loved it. Jack tried to lift the fallen chair with his left arm. Pain moved sharply through his shoulder. Amelia noticed. "You are going to a doctor. I am going home. That was not the sentence I used." Jack looked at her. "You are still giving orders. I am making an observation." "It sounded expensive. I can afford it." "That is not the point." Maisie stood beside him with both hands on her hips. "Dad." Jack looked down. "You too. You said adults should tell the truth carefully. I remember. You said your shoulder hurt a little. It does." She narrowed her eyes. That was not careful truth. June pointed toward the kitchen door. "Urgent care is 8 minutes away." Jack looked around the room and realized everyone had decided against him. Amelia picked up his toolbox. He reached for it. She moved it out of range. "You can have this back after a doctor looks at your shoulder. That is theft. You may include it in your statement." Maisie smiled. Jack sighed. "Fine." At the clinic, the doctor confirmed that nothing was broken. Jack had a deep bruise and a strained muscle that would require rest ice and several days without lifting anything heavy. Jack listened until the doctor said rest. Then his attention faded. Amelia sat in the waiting area with Maisie. She had sent Claire and Marcus back to the office to begin preserving the company files. For the first time since arriving at Blue Heron, Amelia had no assistant beside her, no tablet in her hand, and no meeting waiting on a calendar. Maisie sat beneath a television, playing a silent weather report. She studied Amelia for several minutes. Amelia noticed. "Do you have a question?" "Yes." "What is it? Are you married?" Amelia blinked. "No." "Do you have kids?" "No." "Do you like kids?" Amelia looked towards the examination room. "I have not spent much time around them. That is not what I asked." Amelia smiled despite herself. "Yes, I think I do." Maisie nodded. "Good." Amelia waited. Why? Maisie looked down at the sketchbook resting in her lap. No reason. Amelia had negotiated hotel contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She had faced angry investors, hostile board members, and attorneys who hid threats inside polite language. None of them made her feel as unprepared as an 8-year-old saying no reason. Jack emerged with his arm in a sling. Maisie jumped from the chair. "Is it broken?" "No." "Were you telling careful truth?" Jack looked at Amelia. "She has become difficult. She was difficult when I met her." Maisie took his hand. The three of them walked into the parking lot. Rainwater shone beneath the streetlights. Amelia's car waited near the entrance, but Jack's truck was still parked behind Blue Heron. "I will drive you home," Amelia said. Jack shook his head. "I can drive. The doctor gave you medication. I have not taken it. Your arm is in a sling. I have another arm." Amelia looked at Maisie. "Does he argue like this often, every day?" Jack opened his mouth. Maisie continued, "Sometimes June wins." Amelia held out her hand. "Keys." Jack stared at her. "No." Maisie reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled them out. Jack looked down at her in disbelief. "You cannot search people. I knew where they were." She placed the keys in Amelia's hand. Amelia looked at them, then at Jack. "Your daughter understands risk management. She is grounded." "No, I am not," Maisie said. Amelia drove them home in the black SUV. Jack sat in the passenger seat with his injured arm resting against his chest. Maisie curled beneath a blanket in the back and fell asleep before they reached the second traffic light. The city passed outside in reflections of amber and white. For several minutes, neither Jack nor Amelia spoke. Without the cafe, the company, and Preston between them, the silence felt different. Amelia kept both hands on the steering wheel. "You were right about me." Jack looked at her. "That sounds dangerous. I arrived with a conclusion. Most people do. I thought Blue Heron was an obstacle. You called it a parcel. I did not know anyone there. You did not try." Amelia accepted the words. "No." Jack looked out at the wet streets. "Hannah used to say the truth sounds cruel when you have spent too long avoiding it. She sounds direct. She was. Would she have liked me?" The question escaped before Amelia could stop it. Jack turned toward her. Amelia's eyes remained on the road. "I should not have asked that." Jack looked back at Maisie, sleeping beneath the blanket. "Hannah did not trust people quickly. Neither do you, no." "Did she change her mind sometimes?" Amelia waited. Jack looked at her profile in the passing light. She respected people who admitted when they were wrong. Amelia nodded once. It was not an answer. It was enough for that night. 3 months later, Blue Heron Café reopened before sunrise. The old sign still hung above the door. June had refused to replace it. The blue paint was faded. One corner of the wooden heron's wing had been repaired with a narrow strip of brass. When the morning wind moved through the street, the sign creaked exactly as it had before. Inside the building felt renewed without feeling unfamiliar. The damaged floorboards had been reset and polished. New electrical wiring ran behind the old walls. The kitchen had stainless steel shelves, a repaired oven, and a ventilation system that no longer rattled during the lunch rush. The espresso machine remained behind the counter. A technician had offered to replace it, but June refused. Jack rebuilt the damaged sections with new wiring and restored the chrome until it reflected the cafe lights. At 5:30 that morning, June turned the machine on. It released one clean breath of steam. She placed both hands against the counter. "Welcome back?" Tessa stood beside her in a new dark green apron embroidered with the words, "Operations Manager." She had practiced saying the title aloud several times and still looked over her shoulder when someone used it. Jack carried a crate of coffee cups through the kitchen door. June pointed at his shoulder. "You are not supposed to lift that." My shoulder healed 6 weeks ago. You were instructed to rest. 6 weeks ago. I remember instructions. Maisie entered behind him carrying a box of paper menus. Dad does not. Jack set down the crate. I am being attacked in my workplace. June looked at him. You still do not work here. That is not what you told Amelia. That was before you became a consultant and started using words like compliance review. Tessa opened the pastry case. Do consultants carry coffee cups? Good ones do. The front bell rang. Mrs. Wilkes entered first. She wore a blue dress and carried an umbrella despite the clear sky. Behind her came teachers, nurses, construction workers, hotel employees, retired couples, and families from the surrounding blocks. No company cameras waited outside. No banner announced a corporate rescue. The cafe reopened because people had chosen to return. By 7, every table was full. Tessa moved through the room with steady hands. When a vendor called to question the delivery schedule, she answered without looking toward June for help. The contract says 6:30, she said into the phone. If the driver arrives after 7, we cannot guarantee access to the loading zone. She listened. No, that is not a request. June watched from the register. When Tessa ended the call, June smiled. What, nothing? You are doing the face. What face? The proud face. June turned toward the coffee machine. I have no idea what you mean. The agreement with Vaughn Hospitality had changed more than the walls. Blue Heron now supplied pastries and breakfast breads to 2 nearby hotels. The contract guaranteed minimum monthly orders and allowed June to keep serving her regular customers at the original prices. The company paid for the damage Preston caused. It also funded an independent structural inspection and a small equipment grant without taking ownership of the building. The bank paused foreclosure proceedings, then approved a revised payment schedule based on the new hotel revenue. June signed every page only after Jack, her own attorney, and an independent accountant reviewed it. Amelia did not object to a single revision. The changes inside Vaughn Hospitality were harder. The independent audit found altered inspection photographs in 3 other acquisitions managed by Preston. 2 businesses had sold after sudden equipment failures. Another owner had accepted a reduced offer after receiving warnings about alleged safety violations that were never filed with the city. The company froze all related projects. 1 sale was reversed. Another owner received compensation. The 3rd case remained in court. Preston was charged with assault property damage and fraud-related offenses. His attorneys argued that the company had encouraged aggressive acquisitions. Amelia did not deny the incentive system. She testified before the board that she had approved it. Several directors wanted her removed. Others wanted the investigation handled privately. Amelia refused. At the emergency meeting, she stood at the far end of a long glass table while 12 board members questioned her judgment. Her father's portrait hung on the wall behind them. One director closed the audit report. You are exposing the company to unnecessary liability. The liability already exists. You are volunteering responsibility. I am identifying it, publicly. Yes. The director leaned back. Your father would never have handled a crisis this way. Amelia looked at the portrait. Her father had built the company through disciplined speed and the certainty that hesitation was weakness. For most of her life, she had mistaken his approval for a moral compass. She looked back at the board. My father is not handling this crisis. No one spoke. I am. The board retained her by 2 votes. The performance bonuses tied to below-market purchases were eliminated. Every major acquisition now required independent inspection verification and direct interviews with owners and employees. The company established a community review council for the Savannah redevelopment project. June served as one of its founding members. Tessa held the employee seat. Jack accepted a limited contract as an independent safety and community impact advisor. He refused a permanent office. He refused a company car. He refused the title Amelia's Human Resources Department designed for him because it contained 14 words, and none of them explained what he actually did. He visited properties in work boots and carried the same worn toolbox he had used at Blue Heron. He examined electrical systems, kitchen exits, loading zones, and maintenance records. Then he sat with housekeepers, cooks, delivery drivers, and neighboring business owners. His reports included problems the company had never considered measurable. A loading dock gate that trapped water during storms. a hotel renovation schedule that forced night workers to sleep through daytime drilling, a proposed parking change that would block an apartment building's wheelchair entrance. At first, regional managers disliked him. Then they learned Amelia read every page. One Friday morning, Jack entered Blue Heron and found her sitting in the rear booth. She had arrived alone. No assistants. No coat folded across the chair. No contracts on the table. Only a chipped white mug and a plate with half a biscuit. Jack stopped beside the booth. "You are early. You always say that. You keep arriving early." Amelia looked toward the counter. "June said that to you once. She says it every morning." Jack sat across from her. Amelia pushed a folder toward him. He did not open it. "I thought you came without work." "I did." "That is a folder. It is personal. That is worse." Amelia smiled. Inside were documents confirming the settlement of the final equipment claim and the approval of the Community Council's authority. Jack read the first page. "You got the board to approve veto power over access changes. Temporary veto power. How temporary? 90 days. Too short. I knew you would say that. Then why bring it? Because you are going to rewrite it." Jack looked at her. "You invited me to coffee so I could work. I invited you to coffee because you do not answer emails. I answer important emails. You replied to one message last week. It was important. It was a photograph of a damaged stair rail." "Exactly." Amelia rested her arms on the table. "You are impossible. You hired me. I'm beginning to see the flaw." Maisie appeared beside them with a glass of orange juice. "Dad likes flaws." Jack looked at her. "What does that mean, you fix things?" Amelia lowered her voice. "Your daughter is wise. She is listening." "I am always listening," Maisie said. She climbed into the booth beside Amelia. Over the previous 3 months, Maisie had stopped treating Amelia like a visitor who might disappear after the paperwork was signed. She still watched her carefully. Trust came slowly in the Turner family. Amelia understood that. She never brought Maisie expensive gifts. She never attempted to take Hannah's place in a conversation. She showed up. She attended Maisie's school art exhibit and stood near the back of the room while parents moved between the drawings. She remembered that Maisie disliked raisins and loved storms only when she was indoors. She learned how to braid hair by watching June, though the first attempt left Maisie looking as if she had lost an argument with a rope. She helped with homework once and received a correction from an 8-year-old about Georgia history. Jack found the two of them at the corner table after work. Maisie held up her assignment. She said James Oglethorpe founded Savannah in 1732. Amelia looked offended. That is what the document said. It was 1733. Jack removed his jacket. Corporate reports are not always accurate. Amelia pointed at him. That joke has expired. It still works. Maisie giggled. Those moments unsettled Jack more than conflict had. Conflict gave him a position. He knew how to stand against pressure. He knew how to protect a boundary. He did not know what to do with Amelia sitting at his kitchen table while Maisie explained a drawing. He did not know what to do when Amelia laughed without checking who was watching. He did not know what to do with the part of himself that had begun waiting for Friday mornings. One evening, 3 months and 2 weeks after the reopening, another storm moved toward Savannah. Blue Heron closed early. June and Tessa left through the kitchen with the final catering order. Maisie sat inside the front window coloring while Jack checked the door locks. Amelia stood beneath the awning. Rain tapped against the canvas above her. Jack joined her and pulled the door closed. You parked around the corner. The street is blocked. For construction for the festival. That is what construction people call a festival. Amelia looked at him. You still think I represent every inconvenience in Savannah? Only the expensive ones. Rain gathered along the curb. Across the street, the hotel site had changed. The original entrance plan had been revised to preserve Blue Heron and 2 neighboring buildings. Workers had restored the brick walkway. Trees now stood where temporary fencing once blocked the sidewalk. Amelia watched the rain strike the new pavement. My father could walk into a room and make everyone afraid to disappoint him. Jack leaned against the wall. You have mentioned him twice in 4 months, I know. He built the company. Yes, you loved him. Amelia looked toward the river. Yes, the answer carried more weight than the word. He believed fear created discipline, she continued. When people became quiet around him, he thought they respected him. What did you think I thought the same thing? Jack waited. Amelia watched water stream from the awning. Now I think fear only teaches people how to hide. Jack looked through the cafe window. Maisie sat at the corner table beneath the warm light, her blue crayon moving across the page. Quiet can mean a lot of things. Amelia followed his gaze. Sometimes it means everyone is waiting to see who you choose to be. Jack looked at her. The words had belonged to him once, though he had never said them aloud. Amelia had learned them from the room. She folded her arms against the cool wind. I have been trying to ask you something for 3 weeks. That sounds inefficient. It is. What stopped you? Jack almost smiled. Amelia turned toward him. Do you avoid me because you do not like me or because you do? The question landed between them without protection. Jack looked toward the street. That sounds like something a chief executive would ask. It is not. You expect a direct answer. I am hoping for one. Jack took a slow breath. The rain intensified, filling the space beyond the awning with silver. I like you. Amelia did not move. Jack continued before the words could become easier. That is the problem. Why, he looked through the window again. Maisie had stopped drawing. She was not watching them. At least she was pretending not to. Jack lowered his voice. After Hannah died, everyone told me grief would change shape. Did it? Yes. He rubbed one hand across his jaw. At first it was everything. It was the first thing in the morning and the last thing at night. Then it became smaller. Not gone, just small enough to carry. Amelia remained still. Jack continued. I learned how to make breakfast. I learned how to do school forms. I learned which nights Maisie needed the hallway light left on. I built a life around 2 people, you and Maisie, and Hannah. Amelia looked at him carefully. You think caring about me would remove her? No. Then what are you afraid of? Jack let out a breath. That Maisie will think moving forward means leaving her mother behind. She will not. You cannot know that. No. Amelia's voice softened. But I know I do not want to replace anyone. Jack looked at her. I do not want you near us because you feel guilty. I do feel guilty. The admission surprised him. Amelia continued. I should. Guilt is part of understanding what I allowed. That is not an answer. No. She stepped closer. It is not why I'm standing here. Why are you? Amelia looked through the window at Maisie, then back at Jack. Because when I am with you, I do not feel like the most important person in the room. Jack raised an eyebrow. That is your idea of romance. It is new for me. He laughed. The sound escaped before he could stop it. Amelia smiled. Jack looked down at the wet pavement. You make everything complicated. I thought you liked fixing things. People are not machines. Good. I understand machines less. The front door opened behind them. Maisie stood in the doorway holding her sketchbook. June called. Jack turned. What did she want? She said the pie in the refrigerator expires tomorrow. That is not why she called. She also said I can eat it. Amelia looked at Jack. Serious situation. Maisie stepped beneath the awning. She held the sketchbook against her chest. Are you having a grown-up conversation? Jack glanced at Amelia. We were. Did it work? Not yet. Maisie opened the sketchbook. The drawing showed blue heron beneath a dark blue sky. Rain fell around the building. Jack stood on one side of the page. Amelia stood on the other. Maisie stood between them holding the handle of one large open umbrella. Jack looked at the picture. Is that new? Maisie nodded. What happened to my arm? You were too far away. Amelia looked at the drawing. Are we supposed to move closer? Maisie shrugged. It is raining. Jack gave his daughter a long look. You said you were not listening. I did not say that. Amelia covered a smile. Jack looked from Maisie to Amelia. Dinner. Amelia's expression changed. What? He looked at her. You asked why you were standing here, yes? Have dinner with me. No contracts, no contracts, no reports, no reports. No discussion of pedestrian access. I cannot promise that. Amelia smiled. When Friday? You always see me Friday. Not like this. The uncertainty in his voice made the invitation real. Amelia nodded. Friday. Maisie closed the sketchbook. Can we eat the pie now? Jack looked at her. You planned this. I am 8. You keep records of everything. That is different. They returned inside. Rain continued against the windows while Jack cut 3 slices of peach pie. Amelia sat in the corner booth. Maisie climbed beside her. Jack placed the plates on the table. There were no contracts between them, no acquisition papers, no reports, only pie rain and the quiet beginning of something none of them knew how to name yet. Friday evening, Jack changed shirts 3 times. Maisie sat on his bed holding Hannah's photograph. "The blue one," she said. Jack looked at the shirt spread across the blanket. "You told me the gray one. I changed my mind. You cannot manage this process by changing requirements." "That sounds like Amelia." Jack picked up the blue shirt. Maisie studied the photograph. "Dad." "Yeah. Are you nervous?" "No." She gave him the same suspicious look she had used on the smoke alarm months earlier. Pretending. Jack sat beside her. Maisie placed the photograph on the nightstand. "Mom would want you to go." Jack looked at her. "How do you know she liked when you smiled?" His throat tightened. Maisie continued. "And you smile more now." Jack placed one arm around her. "You know I will always love your mom. I know no one replaces her. I know, and you can tell me if anything feels strange." Maisie leaned against him. "Everything feels strange." Jack closed his eyes. "That is fair, but not bad." He kissed the top of her head. "No, not bad." Amelia arrived at Blue Heron without a driver. She wore a dark green dress and stood beneath the faded sign with her hands clasped in front of her. Jack stopped on the sidewalk. For several seconds, neither spoke. Amelia looked at his shirt. Maisie chose it. "How did you know you look uncomfortable? I am wearing buttons. You wear buttons to meetings. Those are defensive buttons." Amelia laughed. Jack held out his hand. "Ready?" She looked at it, then placed her hand in his. "Where are we going?" "There is a restaurant near Forsyth Park." "Do they know who I am?" "No." "Good." Inside Blue Heron, June and Maisie watched through the front window. Tessa joined them. Jack noticed. He pointed through the glass. "All 3 of you are in trouble." June waved. Maisie held up the sketchbook. Jack shook his head and led Amelia down the street. 6 months later, Maisie's drawing hung in a wooden frame beside the Blue Heron register. The cafe was full. June worked behind the counter while pretending not to supervise Tessa. Marcus sat near the window with black coffee and exact change beside his cup. Mrs. Wilkes argued with a teacher about whether peach preserves belonged on biscuits. Outside, a gentle rain moved across Savannah. Amelia sat in the corner booth helping Maisie choose colors for a new drawing. Jack entered carrying his toolbox. The bell above the door rang. Amelia looked up. The smile that reached her face was no longer polished or uncertain. It belonged there. Jack crossed the room. He placed the toolbox beneath the booth and sat beside her. Maisie pushed the drawing toward him. It showed Blue Heron glowing against the rain. June stood behind the counter. Tessa carried a tray. Marcus waited near the door. Amelia sat beside the window. Jack stood outside with one hand on the cafe door. He was not keeping anyone out. He was holding it open. Beneath the picture, Maisie had written in blue crayon, "Being strong means knowing what you want to protect." Jack read the words twice. Then he looked at his daughter. "You wrote this?" Maisie nodded. "Do you like it?" Jack reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I love it." The room grew quiet for one brief second. Not because anyone had fallen, not because anyone was afraid. Amelia's fingers found Jack's beneath the table. He let her hold them. Then June called an order from behind the counter. Tessa laughed near the kitchen. A spoon struck the side of a coffee cup. The old sign creaked above the door as the rain moved through the street. Conversation filled the cafe again. Jack looked at Maisie, then at Amelia, then at the room that had once carried them through grief, fear, and the long work of beginning again. He did not need the whole world to remember the man he had chosen to be. The 2 people beside him already did.